Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, February 22nd. Welcome to the Tiger Club of Kansas City Zoom call. Our guest today is Lila Bromberg, who covers the Missouri Tigers for the Kansas City Star. Before we get to our discussion with Lila, I do have some sad news to pass on. Terry Sprick, longtime member of the Tiger Club and a big Mizzou fan, lost his long and difficult battle to cancer in the last week. Terry was a regular at our luncheons for many years and also worked as an usher at what is now T-Mobile Center. He was a good man and will be missed, and we send condolences to his family. Some updates on Mizzou sports. The Tiger basketball team will be at home tonight, take on 17th ranked Tennessee. Tip-off is at 6 p.m. That will be on the SEC network. The women will be back in action on Thursday in a home game against Kentucky. Coach Brian Smith's wrestling team lost a one-point battle, 17-16 to Iowa State, who's ranked 5th last week. That effort did move the Tigers back into the top 10. They are currently ranked 9th, and they'll be at the Big 12 championships March 5th and 6th. Again, they're back in the Big 12 for wrestling this year. And the gymnastics team's also ranked 9th in the nation. They pulled off a win in a tri-meet against Arkansas and number 6 LSU. Check out our website and YouTube channel for more information on upcoming events. We do want to make note that our golf tournament is on the calendar for June 27th at Oakwood Country Club, and we'll let you know as soon as you can register for that. Thanks to Darren, as always, for engineering our call, and Paul Blackman, Barry Canner, Dave Tyson for getting our guests. Today, Lila Bromberg. She joined the Star in September after graduating from the University of Maryland. She grew up in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., and got her first professional sports writing job with USA Today while she was still a junior in high school. While at Maryland, she also did work for Yahoo Sports, Sports Illustrated, and she was involved with the Olympic Information Services at the Tokyo Olympics last year. Last year, she was ranked the best college sports writer in the country by the Associated Press. Lila, it's quite a resume for somebody just out of school. What attracted you about coming to Kansas City and working for the Star after all your years back east?
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I had heard a lot of really great things about their sports department. A lot of writers that I'd really looked up to, someone like Wright Thompson, who's a Mizzou grad, went through the Kansas City Star newsroom. And I had a bunch of friends that had worked there or had connections there through the Sports Journalism Institute and the interns that they've had, and had heard really good things about their sports department. And it seemed like a really great fit. So decided to come out to the Missouri, Kansas City area from DC.
We're glad you're here. Let's talk about the basketball team briefly. Tigers take on 17th ranked Tennessee tonight. This is the 4th game in 8 days. Tigers have lost the 3 previous ones. We're down to 8 players, probably a little tired. Tennessee's one of the better defensive teams in the country. What's not to like about Tigers' chances tonight?
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned with Tennessee being one of the best defensive teams, one of the areas they're so good in defensively is creating turnovers and steals for a Missouri team that already struggles to take care of the ball night in and night out. I think that kind of, spells disaster in terms of points off turnovers. So their ability to be able to defend on the fast break is going to be really key in this one, and to try and take care of the ball a bit better.
You made a point in your last game story, and it's been true, that losses have pretty much followed one of 2 patterns. The game is either the Tigers should get blown out in the first half, or they have a late lead and can't finish at the end. What is the Tigers don't shoot it very well. The defensive ranking is not very good. What can you tell us something positive at this stage of the season? Why do they struggle so early, and why do they struggle so late, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the issues kind of come back down to roster construction, but in that kind of same regard, I guess that's, something to look forward to, as well as, as much as this team is struggling, you have seen some really good stretches from some of the young players on this team. Trevin Brazil is a guy that's going to be getting NBA attention, after another season or two, just because of his length and athleticism. And I think he has the ability to be a really special player with his versatility. Caleb Brown has shown some really good flashes, and I think honestly should be seeing a lot more minutes at point guard. You look at the plus minus, or really just a lot, not even statistics, but just what he does in terms of creating more ball movement. And that's honestly been a huge issue for the team this season, has been, settling for 3-pointers and not really finding the best shots. And that shooting has been an issue all year. So those are two kind of young guys to look forward to, as well as Aiden Shaw coming in next year. So I guess if you're looking for a positive, the young talent on this team definitely would be. And also just knowing that, you look at a lot of programs that really struggled last year. Now, if the transfer portal, the team has the ability in the offseason to completely revamp its roster. Obviously, that didn't go that well for Mizzou this offseason, but you're seeing it with a lot of the top teams in the country right now, that if you are able to mine the transfer market the right way, you can really have a dramatic turnaround that you wouldn't be able to have before.
You, from your writing, are obviously a great student of analytics and basketball. You wrote an interesting story last week that studied the defensive ratings, I guess, of the new guys that have come in this year, and they're not very good. What you think Kanso hasn't gotten these guys to buy in, or are they just not good defenders?
Yeah, I think they're just not good defenders, or guys that are kind of willing to be good defenders. I think that's kind of a lot of the issue there. In that article, I kind of discussed that each of the transfers he brought in didn't really come from good defensive programs. And their main role were being these kind of scorers at mid-major. And I think when they went to the transfer portal, I think there's kind of this thinking that he could get players to come in and just get them to adapt to playing to his style, to playing with toughness. But that's a lot easier said than done. And that's really been a huge issue this year, with all of those guys coming in. And their shooting I didn't get into their shooting and offense in the article either, because I wanted to be able to focus on the defense. I think that's really been a key, because if you look at Kanso Martin teams, they've always been led by defense, but they're not having the production they were able to have on that end of the floor either.
Talking with Lila Bromberg at the Kansas City Star. If you'd like to ask her a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of our screen. Lila, as the Tigers look to the offseason, there'll be some decisions need to be made, but what area they need to improve in several areas? Where do you see the most? To me, it seems like they need to really get a true point guard. They also need to improve the defense. What's the one thing that they really need to do better next year?
Yeah, what you mentioned about getting a true point guard is a really good point. Like I said, I think there's potential with Caleb Brown there, but ideally you'd want someone who is more veteran from the portal. Shooting is going to be a huge need as well. And to really be able to evaluate that a bit more, they thought having a guy like Boogie Coleman coming in, that they were going to get more shooting from him. He had shot at a decent clip at Ball State, and they weren't able to get that. And I think getting some more kind of proven guys will be key as well in the portal. A lot of the guys they got were from mid-major, low-tier programs. I think you want to get a guy that's, from a winning program, is kind of used to being around a program that has winning habits. I think is key as well.
Is Javon Pickett, I think, could come back for another season. Is that correct? And do you think he will?
Yeah, I believe he should have that COVID eligibility still built in. I'm not really sure. I don't feel like we've gotten the sense from him yet. I think that's going to kind of depend on what happens with the rest of the roster and things with him career-wise, but that'll definitely be something interesting to follow.
Let's talk about the Missouri women's team. They had a big win on Sunday, a much-needed win against Mississippi State after they'd lost 4 in a row. What do they have left to do to cement their NCAA tournament hopes?
So right now they're projected as a 10 seed in the NCAA tournament, with these games now coming down for the stretch of the season. They're going to definitely need to get another win in the regular season, I would believe there. So right now you've got just 2 games left in a regular season versus Kentucky and at Florida. I think you need to win that home game versus Kentucky on Thursday. I think they can get away with losing at Florida. Florida's been a big surprise this year. Looks really good as ranked. I think if they can get the win versus Kentucky, they should be into the tournament. Obviously, it would be a huge help to be able to get a win or two in the SEC tournament to really boost that seeding and boost what they could do come March. But I think as long as they're able to get this win at Kentucky and, win that first game in the SEC tournament, I think they should be fine there.
Blackwell sat out a game last week. It said, I think, violation of team policy, and obviously they don't talk much about that. She came back and had a double-double on Sunday. Do you get any feel for what's going on with her?
Yeah, we tried to ask about that and didn't really get much insight into that. What Robin Pinchton had said was that it had to do with the team having kind of high expectations that weren't exactly being met. She talked about after the Mississippi State game, just, I believe, wanting to be a better teammate and kind of meeting those expectations. So it wasn't really clear what those expectations were that aren't being met from what we spoke with them. But she's had a really special season for them. So, anytime they can get her on the court is obviously going to help them, and really just an incredible season she's having. That was her 19th double-double against Mississippi State.
Yeah, and they are still the only team that's beaten South Carolina this year.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that without Blackwell. They've been entertaining to watch, but wildly inconsistent. They almost beat Baylor down there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely been some inconsistency there, especially on the defensive end on the floor. This team has the ability to shoot the ball really well. They have a lot of talent within that locker room, and I think a lot of it is really just getting them to play as one unit on the defensive end of the floor, keep ball movement up. The effort that they had against Mississippi State, they were playing really well defensively there to start things off and then let off the gas a little bit. And they've kind of become a little similar to the men's team in that way of letting leads go a little bit there. But I think if they can really all play as one unit defensively, their offense is good enough that they can maybe cause some upsets.
Let's talk about spring football, which is getting underway. What are the storylines you're following there?
The biggest thing with spring football this year is just all the off-season changes for this team, having so many transfers come in, having all of the coaching changes that they've had. And, with Steve Wilkes now leaving to the NFL, having another new defensive coordinator, bringing in you had so much turnover on that coaching staff, whether it was bringing in guys like Jacob Peeler and Kevin Peoples, or, shuffling things around so that Bush Hamden is now doing quarterbacks, and that, Eli Drinkwitz is kind of stepping away there. You've got this really talented freshman class coming in, a ton of transfers. So it's just a lot of new faces around the program. And we talked to, seniors yesterday. We talked to some of them, just kind of the challenge of adapting to that this offseason.
At quarterback, Brady Cook and Tyler Macon are back. Sam Horn is coming in. I guess Brady Cook would have the edge right now, don't you think?
Yeah, I would think so right now. We haven't honestly seen that much of Tyler Macon, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how he progresses throughout spring practice. I think out of all of them, Sam Horn is the most, talented player just based on what we saw of his high school career and what he was able to do there. Got a ton of buzz towards the end of his high school career, ended up getting into the top 10 of Georgia all-time passing records. But because he decided to stay in high school to play his spring season, his final season of baseball, he's going to be kind of coming in at a disadvantage. They've gotten him a playbook and he's trying to learn the system while he can, but hasn't really been, in communication with, players as much from what I heard yesterday, because he's just, finishing out his senior year. So he'll kind of be in a disadvantage there. So, I mean, yeah, I would give it to Brady Cook right now as a front runner, but it'll definitely be an interesting quarterback competition to watch.
I think we all expect Luther Burden will be an immediate impact freshman. Among those that the Tigers have acquired in the transfer portal, who do you see might have an immediate impact this year?
Yeah, two players that stand out to me right away on the defensive end are Tyron Hopper. It's kind of confusing. You've got
Tyron and Tyrone.
Yeah,
and they're cousins, right? Yeah.
They're cousins. Their names are very similar. That's going to be very confusing writing stories this year.
Poor Mike Kelly. How's he going to handle?
Yeah. But Tyron had a great season at Florida last year. He, especially against that game against Missouri, he was especially dominant. Is a guy that's really, I think, going to be able to cause some good pressure on quarterbacks, which was at times a huge aspect that was missing last year, coming in as a linebacker. So, I mean, I think he's going to be a really interesting player there. And then you'll also have Jaden Jernigan coming in from Oklahoma State on the defensive line. He's, a little bit kind of undersized when you're looking at the size of defensive linemen in the SEC, but, he has really good quickness, was able to make a big impact there last season at Oklahoma State. And so I would expect those two guys to be really interesting to watch. And then Nathaniel Pete as well, a running back coming in from Stanford, could do a really good job filling the role of Tyler Beatty. He led the Pac-12 in kick return yards last season and was a special teams player of the year. So he has a lot of ability in the kick return game as well. It'd be interesting to see how they balance using him there.
The one of those Hoppers, didn't he graduate from high school like in 2015 or something?
Yeah, it was funny when I was writing that. I was like, he graduated high school before I did, and he's still in college.
That's interesting. He's going to be quite a bit older than some of his freshman teammates. Hey, I want to talk to you about your new podcast, which I say it debuted recently, as this morning, called Beyond the Brackets, and it's through the Stars podcast. I had a chance to listen to the first half of it this morning. It's quite good. You had the beat writers for North Carolina and Kentucky on, covering a lot of national issues. Talk about the podcast and what you hope for it.
Yeah, so it's, like you said, called Beyond the Bracket, and we launched it this morning as a special edition series for our KC Sports Beat podcast. I've followed college basketball for a long time, both in the teams I've been covering and on a national level, and, done reporting on it from national outlets as well. And that was something that I really wanted to be able to focus on as we get towards March Madness here. So basically with this podcast each week from now until the tournament, and we might have some episodes after that as well, I'm going to be bringing in different sports writers and columnists from around the country to discuss where their programs are at, but also just discussing projections for the NCAA tournament, best teams and players around the country, different postseason awards. On this first episode, we got into the first reveal from the selection committee of the top 16 seeds. We got into teams that are on the bubble right now and what teams could kind of make a run there, our final four picks. So a lot of fun stuff there. And each week we'll be having different people coming on. Next week we'll have our Jesse Newell, who covers Kansas, and then Luke DeCock, who's a columnist for the News and Observer, who covers Duke. So knowing that Jesse's going to be on, I'm sure we'll get into some analytics and some different topics there about how teams are evaluated, which should be a lot of fun. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to record, and just hoping to be able to really discuss college basketball on a national level. I think even when the team you're covering isn't doing well, or the team you're a fan of isn't doing well, March Madness is always a really awesome time of year. So it's a great way to get prepared for your bracket and find out about teams around the country.
Again, it's called Beyond the Bracket, and it will be updated every Tuesday then. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be coming out every Tuesday.
And they can access it through the Stars website. And again,
Yeah, and it's also on Spotify, I believe, in Apple Podcasts under Sportsbeat KC.
Okay, I heartily recommend it. I was very impressed. So good luck with that. Let's also talk about. I want to ask you about a national topic, and you talked about on the podcast the Juwan Howard situation. You're from Big Ten country. He had a run-in with Mark Turgeon last year at Maryland. I guess the game you were there probably. They announced today he's suspended for the rest of the season. I was watching that game, but I turned it off before the end, and then I saw the highlights. That was quite an incident. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was very surprising to see there. And I was also interested just to see what the Big Ten came out with. I thought there'd at least be a 1-game suspension for Greg Gard or something there. So I was a bit surprised to see that, but not that surprised that you had the Juwan Howard suspension there. As you mentioned, there's that issue with Maryland last season, but I was surprised because that issue last year more so stemmed with Hunter Dickinson, their player, kind of made up this whole narrative that Maryland never recruited him, even though they had been recruiting him since he was in high school. And he had gotten into it with fans when he played at Maryland. And then there had been more tension than when the two teams played at Michigan. So by the time the Big Ten tournament happened, there's a lot of tension there, and it ended up boiling over, but it didn't escalate to the point that happened with Wisconsin. It was just kind of a screaming match and people being held back. So to see what happened in that game on Sunday with, Juwan Howard kind of, throwing hands there was really surprising to see. And I think a lot of it also just, there has to be a lot of frustration bubbling there with them being a preseason top 10 team. And now with him suspended, I mean, they're probably not going to make the tournament.
You covered Maryland. Mark Turgeon went to KU, coach at Texas A&M. So a lot of folks around here are familiar with him. Why did he walk away, and do you see him coaching again?
Yeah, so from what my sources within the program had been telling me, that tension had kind of been building for him going back into last season, which honestly last season showed how good of a coach he is. That team should not have made the NCAA tournament. It had no business winning an NCAA tournament game. The one it did over UConn was, I mean, you looked at where that team started 4-9 in conference play, just really didn't have all the right pieces. And he was able to find that way to get that team in the tournament, get a win without a true point guard or center. But there was a lot of pressure mounting on him that season because the team wasn't doing well. If the 2020 season isn't canceled, that team is probably making an Elite Eight or Final Four. I certainly had booked stuff to Atlanta and was under the impression that I was going to be covering a Final Four, Elite Eight with how good that team was. So, you just kind of have this dramatic turnaround of it going from that to then this not so great season that he was able to make something out of. And there was some frustration with how long it took them to offer him an extension. When that happened, it took several weeks for that to happen after the season. And, I wasn't obviously at any of the games there, this year, but from what I had heard from people, there's a lot of, booing and just a lack of support from fans. And he never really fully had the fan support there. It was always going to be a tough job following a championship coach. And from what I had heard, it kind of reached a point where he didn't want to put his family through a lot of that anymore. His kids being in high school and, having to go to games and see that. And it had been weighing on him for a few years. And I think he kind of just reached a boiling point.
You see him coaching again?
I could see him coaching at a mid-major level, or maybe a school that isn't basketball first. I think the pressure was just a bit much, and we'll see what happens there.
Talk a little about your Olympic experience last year.
Yeah, so that was a very different experience for me. It was my first Olympics, and obviously in the middle of COVID, which was really unique. So we were basically in a bubble over there where you can only go to the media center or your hotel. Most of my meals were from a convenience store in the hotel there, but convenience stores in Tokyo are actually pretty incredible. Any type of ramen you could imagine, and actually really great food there. So it was definitely unique, getting tested every day and just all of the restrictions there, and no fans. So not a normal Olympic Games, but it was a really great experience. Covered that USA basketball upset against France, which was really interesting to cover. Got to cover some men's basketball, women's basketball, did some boxing, field hockey, beach volleyball, just a bunch of different things there. It wasn't what I usually do in terms of reporting and things like that. I was working for their wire service over there. So going and doing interviews and basically getting news up that then media around the world, were able to use for their content, because not everyone could be at the games or be at every event.
We're going to get to questions from our viewers in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you about a couple things that you're involved in and trying to promote, I guess, or write about more mental health and diversity in sports. Talk about your initiatives in those areas.
Yeah, I think, it's really important to discuss those issues. Back when I was on the Maryland beat, I did a big enterprise feature on the involvement of mental health within the football program. Their football coach, Mike Loxley, had a son that dealt with mental health issues. And when he took over that program, a player had recently died, Jordan McNair, who collapsed, and what led to the firing of DJ Durkin, who is now a defensive coordinator in the SEC somehow. But, wrote about kind of their initiative there in trying to create a space for their players to feel open, speaking about mental health issues, to get with therapists and to get the help they needed, and how that really allowed the program to bond. And I've done kind of a lot of different work trying to talk to players about those issues, because they really do affect performance on the field. You've seen more athletes talk about it in recent years, Simone Biles at the Olympics, and a lot of players as of late. That's been in the news with Ben Simmons as well. And then with diversity in sport, that's a big thing I focus on in my work with national publications. When I was with Yahoo Sports, I did an article looking at the lack of diversity within leadership of college football, and then also ended up working on a series that we did on kind of what leads to lack of diversity in different sports. So I looked at the NHL and talked with a bunch of stars in the league who are Black about their experiences growing up within the sport, kind of explored the cost of hockey and how that plays into the lack of diversity there. And so, those are things that I always think are important to, really look at and go beyond just game coverage and be able to talk about important topics within sports and how they affect them.
I feel a book is coming in your near future. Is that possible?
That's definitely the hope for my career down the line, is to be able to, work on books.
I think you have a very, very bright future. Are you ready for some questions from our viewers?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay, hold on here. Reading your game day predictions, you are usually pretty close on the opponent's score, but often far off on the Tigers. Is that a pretty good indication of how inconsistent they are?
I hadn't thought about that, but I definitely think that would be. Yeah, it's usually, I can tell kind of how another team's going to do, but on any night in, night out, you're probably going to not really know what you're getting from Mizzou. Are they going to be able to shoot the ball well? Are they going to commit to driving into the paint and really finding good looks? Or are they just going to shoot errant threes? Are they going to collapse defensively? It's definitely been inconsistent with this team, except for what you mentioned at the start of this call of the consistency of dropping games.
What's the feeling in Columbia about Kansos' status and return?
Yeah, so I think with kind of, it's clear that the fan base is not too pleased and is pretty upset. It's hard to get a sense of what the school wants to do, because it's the first year under Desiree. They have a prior relationship. Her son is coming in as a walk-on next year, and we don't really know how she's going to handle the situation, as this is really her first big move at Missouri. This is going to, play a huge factor in what her reputation ends up being down the line, and her impact on the school. So we're going to learn a lot about what her strategy is going to be as athletic director from how this is handled. But I think it's important to keep in mind, you fire him this season, you're having to deal with this $6 million buyout. And then you have coaching jobs like Maryland and Louisville coming up that are top 20 jobs in the country, but you're just not going to be able to realistically compete with at this point in time. If you look at how much money Missouri has been putting into his program versus kind of those programs, as well as the recruiting ground, one of those being Kentucky, one of them being in the DC area. And obviously some other jobs are going to open up as well. So I think it's going to be tough to fire him this year if you're just thinking about who are you going to get that's better.
Being a woman, what are the challenges for you in covering men's sports?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's, there's not a lot of women covering sports. There were, luckily when I was on the Maryland beat, the Washington Post writer was a woman, which really helped. And so it's been kind of, different coming in now and being the only woman on the beat. I think, a lot of it is just kind of how, people view you and wanting to be taken seriously. It's kind of always having a chip on your shoulder of wanting to work harder because of that. And then I think with players itself, it's being able to establish the same sort of, relationship in a professional way. It's, a lot harder to ask for, a source's phone number or something like that and make it clear that it's just professional or different things like that. But, obviously, way better than it has been. And I think, it's only going to continue to get better. I'm really grateful for having organizations like the Association for Women in Sports and having a network for that, as well as the Sports Journalism Institute, which promotes minorities and women in sports newsrooms. So it's been really good to kind of have those networks there.
And on the Star Sports staff, you now have two Hall of Fame writers, Vahe Gregorian, Blair Kirchhoff. How special is it to have them as colleagues? Yeah,
it really is special. And so happy for Vahe that he was able to get that. That's so well deserved. They've really been, those have been really the two guys that have been most helpful for me with my transition. And it's just great to have them there to be able to bounce ideas off of. It was so much fun getting to help out with Chiefs games, to, be with that group and spend some more time with Vahe, especially, one of the kindest people that you'll ever come across. So it's been really awesome to get to learn from them.
I'm going to divert from our viewers' questions for a minute. I wanted to ask you about your Chiefs coverage. That when Blair took ill, that had to be a short notice deal. Talk about how that came about and what your thoughts were about it.
Yeah, that was, really obviously a tough situation with Blair, and luckily he's doing a lot better, which, we're all really, really happy about. But, so you had him dealing with what he was dealing, and then, Sam Mellinger left to take the role with the Royals. So you're down two people on that beat. And I reached out to my editors asking if, they would need any help. It was actually the week of the Kansas game. So I was already going to be staying with Vahe for the weekend and in the area. So asked if I could come and help out at the game that weekend. I believe that was against the Raiders. So ended up helping out with that game. And then from there, just ended up helping out with the rest of the season, and then got to go and cover playoff games, which was a lot of fun, especially that game where versus the Bills was really cool to be there in person and cover.
It was the greatest game I've ever seen. We had Dana Hughes on last week from the Chiefs Radio Network, and we thoroughly dissected the Cincinnati game, so we won't touch on that anymore. Next question. There are 6 SEC teams in the basketball top 25 or receiving votes. Mizzou plays 2 of them this week. What are your thoughts on the overall strengths of the conference, and where do you think it ranks nationally among the conferences?
Yeah, so this is actually something that we ended up discussing in the podcast as well. And John Clay gave some really, really great perspective on that as a beat writer for Kentucky, a team that was at the top of the conference for so long. And he's really been able to see how it's expanded. So I definitely checked that out. I think in terms of kind of top conferences in the country, it's been really interesting to see in recent years where you have the ACC has kind of completely dropped off here in a fashion that we've never seen. And I think the SEC is up there with the Big 12 and the Big 10. The conference has gotten better coaches and brought in a lot better talent. You're having guys like Nate Oates and Eric Musselman and Bruce Pearl, who are able to bring in a lot of talent that wasn't in the conference previously. And that's really bringing up the conference across the league. I think when you look at the SEC and the improvement there, a lot of it comes down to recruiting and the players that they've been able to bring in. I think it's definitely up there with the top 3 leagues in the country. I think for me right now, the Big 12 has to get the best conference in the country. I mean, you look at that conference and just statistically how good every team is defensively, offensively. It's kind of unprecedented to have a team like that where you have every single team is within the top 60 or 70 of KenPom rankings is pretty unprecedented and just top to bottom. Obviously, it's a smaller league, so you don't really kind of have those bottom feeders, but night in, night out, those games are tremendous. So that would probably be my pick for the top league right now, but I think the Big Ten and SEC are right out there.
As an aside, you grew up in Maryland territory when they were in the ACC. Of course, then they went to the Big Ten. The ACC really seems down. What's happened there?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to see, and it's still interesting around Maryland because everyone is still kind of upset that they left the ACC, but now it's kind of looking like maybe that was a better move, even if you're losing those rivalries. And we're going to continue to see the ACC shift. You had Roy Williams step down. You're now having Coach K stepping down. Larry Naranega is definitely getting up there. You're going to see him go in recent years, you would think, as well as Jim Boeheim. And that's going to leave, Virginia is kind of the most stable program probably within there. I mean, Duke's bringing in an insane recruiting class, and looks like they're probably not going to drop off too much. But again, it comes down to recruiting and not getting a lot of those same players. CL Brown, who came on our podcast, talked about that as well. And he wrote a really good piece on that about how when you look at the NBA prospects for this season and you look at the first round prospects, you're just not having the same talent and type of players that you would normally have in that league anymore. And a lot of it comes down to the SEC and some of these other leagues being able to recruit better. The ACC dominated recruiting for so long, and now we're seeing a shift, especially through the transfer portal as well, where they're just not getting the same caliber of players.
Next question. I know you've been focused on the 2 basketball teams in football, but Mizzou's softball team is currently ranked nationally in 8-3. Missouri baseball after the 3-1 start. Will you be covering them and your comments on those?
Yeah, so things have definitely been really busy with both basketball teams and football, and then helping out with Chiefs and our March Madness coverage. But I'm definitely hoping to be able to cover those teams a bit more. Definitely a lot of excitement around that softball program. So I'm looking forward to being able to come out to some games there, once we get further into the season.
Next question. I've been very impressed by your reporting. Could you share when and how you became interested in sports writing? Any advice for young men and women getting into the business?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I got involved. So I started working, at my middle school paper and like high school paper, and was doing sports and investigative journalism and a bunch of different things early on. I think the thing that definitely helped me is my high school had an internship program. So every winter we would get 2 weeks off to go do an internship. I think it's really something that more schools should be doing. It was the best thing for me. So my first couple of years of high school, I think one of those years I interned at some sort of like home and design magazine or something like that. I don't entirely remember, but my junior year, I interned for 2 weeks at USA Today. And at that point I knew that I wanted to go into sports journalism. I knew I wanted to go into journalism. Wasn't sure whether I wanted to do sports or something more on the investigative or political side. And doing that internship really made me realize how much I wanted to be in sports. I've always been a huge sports fan, love writing, and that internship really allowed me to see what it was like to be in a newsroom, how to pitch stories. And I then ended up getting a call from the managing editor 2 weeks later, and they ended up hiring me as the youngest person to work for the company, which was a really great experience. And then throughout college, just really, I've kind of had the benefits reaped, I guess, kind of the not benefits, but the kind of bad part of it now of kind of just grinding as hard as I did it in college. But, really glad I did, and being able to work for so many different publications and get that experience. So I definitely say for anyone wanting to go into sports journalism, it's just really important to get that experience right away, and try and reach out to people for internships or freelance opportunities, or even whether it's just kind of blogging and writing on your own to get a feel for things.
I started out, I was in journalism at Mizzou and was sports writer for a while. I wasn't even the best sports writer in my fraternity. You were the best in the country by the AP. Talk about winning that award.
Yeah, that was really cool. They have a contest every year. And so, you submit a profile. So I ended up submitting actually two of the stories I talked about today, the mental health story and the hockey story, as well as a game coverage I had done from a Maryland game. And then they have voters from the Associated Press, editors, vote on that. So it was a really huge honor to be able to win that, especially just knowing how hard I worked throughout college. And then actually right after I got back from the Olympics, went out to Las Vegas to, accept that award and speak on a panel about that hockey story as well, which ended up, winning an award as part of a project. So it was definitely humbling and really awesome. And, just trying to be able to find ways to incorporate that more into my Mizzou coverage of, finding those opportunities to really be able to share important stories.
What was the hockey story about?
The hockey story was about the lack of diversity within hockey and the NHL, and kind of the what's led to that and what the league can do to change that.
Judging by your background there, it looks like you're a bit of a hockey fan.
Yeah, so growing up in the DC area, I mean, I was a Ravens fan because of my stepdad, but in terms of kind of other teams, like the Wizards weren't great, so I followed like the NBA, but like the really good team in the area was always the Capitals, Washington Capitals. So got into hockey a lot earlier, and those are kind of just ones I had from growing up.
I've been to a Capitals game up there, and it's a lot of fun. So
yeah.
How much is your game coverage is affected by the fact that the Star, at least the hard copy, doesn't generally print the story until a day later?
I don't think it affects it as much during games. Like it affected it with those Chiefs games because we all kind of shift things around to have a print deadline. It's definitely, I think, a shame just kind of with the journalism industry as a whole that, now we have stuff printed the next day. It's with everywhere around the country. But I don't think it really affects kind of things as much for when I'm actually covering the game itself.
Next question. I enjoyed your article in the Star about Tiger men's basketball defensive problems. Do you see them being able to turn it around during the SEC tournament?
I think it'd be hard for them to, just because at this point in the season, if you haven't already, it's just hard to see that happening, especially since all these teams are going to be playing even harder in the SEC tournament. The pressure is going to be greater there. I guess you kind of never know. I think it's just an issue of the consistency of they'll defend really well for some stretches in games and then completely let off the gas. So, if they can find a way to have more of a consistent effort, maybe, but it's hard to kind of see that completely turning around.
All right. The next question is very hard hitting. To the extent you've had an opportunity to get around Columbia, what's your favorite eatery?
I think I definitely need to try more places, and I'm very open to recommendations. I really like Cafe Berlin so far. They have really good kind of breakfast and brunch foods that I often will get on the weekends or before I'm going to Mizzou game, because the food they give the media isn't great. So sometimes I'll stop there and get something. They have a really good breakfast burrito and some other stuff like that. That's my favorite spot so far. I definitely need to explore more places.
Shakespeare's?
Yeah, I've had Shakespeare's, and that was really good as well.
What is your impression of the impact of the NIL so far? Do you think it could significantly help non-traditional successful football teams compete with the traditional powers?
Yeah, you've definitely seen a huge impact on NIL with recruiting over the past year. And now you're seeing a lot of these teams form what are being called NIL collectives, where you're getting groups of alumni together to then work with local businesses to kind of, match pairings. There's a really good article in The Athletic about it from David Uppin about how that's taking form at Tennessee and other places in the SEC. And I think it really could help a lot of programs with this. I mean, you look at a guy like Luther Burden, and he's going to be able to have NIL opportunities as a kid from St. Louis that he wouldn't be able to have at another school, because he's going to be going into Missouri with everyone already knowing who he is, being this kind of, hometown hero who stayed home. And so I think that could have a big impact on, in-state recruiting. Is if you're able to stay home, you already have this fan base built in where that can really help you. I think where I'm really interested to see as well is how it impacts basketball. And I'm going to be working on an article on this that's going to be coming out closer to the tournament as well. But with women's basketball, that's really where you're seeing a lot of it being capitalized. I'm really passionate about covering women's basketball, and it's been really cool to see people like Paige Beckers get deals with Gatorade and StockX, Ozzie Fudd there with Chipotle, and, women's athletes, and how they're really taking advantage of that and how that's going to play into the NCAA tournament and them getting more sponsorships.
I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, have you had a chance to spend much time with Desiree Reed-Francois?
Yeah, no, I haven't yet. I'm still waiting for an opportunity to sit down with her. Mizzou's not the best with media requests. I'm still kind of waiting on a time that I'm able to get that interview and sit down. But, she's been really kind whenever she's been around games, whether it's kind of, coming into the, press room to say hi, or around press row, and, gotten really great energy from her and seems great, but definitely looking forward to opportunity to kind of get to know her more and, her strategies and going about everything, whether it's, whether keeping a coach on or off, financial strategy, things like that. Looking forward to finding some more time to speak with her.
Well, Lila, we really appreciate your time. I want to say one thing. We've got another question here. Big one. It's snowing here in Kansas City. What's the situation in Columbia if we're coming in for the game tonight?
I don't see any snow right now. I definitely need to check the weather and see what's going to be going on there. I haven't heard anything so far, but that's a good reminder for me that I should be sure to check that tonight.
Okay. Anyway, I was going to say your two predecessors at the Star stayed around about a year or less and then use it as a springboard to go somewhere else, which I understand, but we certainly hope you will stay for a while because you're doing a great job and we enjoy reading your stories in the Star. So thank you very much for joining us. And next week, our guest will be Dan Leibovitz, who is the assistant commissioner in the SEC for basketball. So it's the first time he'll be visiting us. Lila, I hope you can visit us in person sometime when we're meeting again at the Westport Flea Market.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Again, we'll see you folks next week with Dan Leibovitz from the SEC. In the meantime, have a great week. And if you're driving down to Columbia tonight, be careful and get the Tigers a win. Have a great week, everyone.